The first time the bank called me, I thought it was a scam. I was standing in the narrow kitchen of my apartment in Minneapolis, with a mug of coffee cooling in one hand and a grocery list half finished on the counter, when a polite woman with a clear Midwestern voice asked whether I was aware that my personal loan payment was now 31 days overdue. I remember staring at the basil plant on my windowsill while she spoke. The leaves were going yellow at the edges because I kept forgetting to rotate the pot toward the light. And for some reason, that is what my brain held onto while the rest of the sentence landed like a crack across glass. My personal loan, overdue, 31 days. There are moments when your body understands danger before your mind catches up. My fingers tightened around the mug. I could feel the warmth of it against my palm. But the rest of me had already gone cold. "I think you have the wrong person," I said. The woman paused in that careful, professional way people do when they realize they may have just stepped into something messier than a routine collections call. "Can you confirm your full name and date of birth for security purposes?" I did. She confirmed the last 4 digits of my social security number. Then the address on the loan. My parents' house. That was the moment the room changed. Before I tell you what happened after that call, let me take you back to where it all started. And if this story resonates with you, like and subscribe, only if it does. Because some people know what it feels like to be the dependable child in a family that mistakes responsibility for permission, to be the one who pays attention, keeps the peace, remembers the bills, remembers the birthdays, remembers who needs what, and then one day discovers that your reliability has been used against you so often, it has become the tool they use to justify taking more. My name is Meredith Sloan. By the time the bank called, I was 34 years old. 3 years into rebuilding my credit after graduate school. Finally earning enough to feel something close to stable. And naive enough to believe that distance had solved more family problems than it actually had. I lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a brick building with old radiators, squeaky hardwood floors, and windows that looked out over an alley lined with maples and dented recycling bins. The place smelled like coffee in the morning and laundry soap by afternoon, because the machines in the basement vented badly. I loved it because it was mine. Every plate in the cabinet, every lamp, every cheap framed print on the wall. No one else had chosen any of it. No one else had claimed a piece of it. That mattered to me more than most people understood. I grew up in St. Time, Cloud, about an hour north, in a beige split-level house with a 2-wide driveway and a kitchen that always smelled faintly of burnt toast and lemon cleaner. From the outside, my family looked steady. My father worked in municipal maintenance. My mother did bookkeeping part-time for a dentist's office and full-time for every social hierarchy within a 10-mile radius. We were not rich, but we were respectable in the way small-town families often value more than comfort. Grass cut, driveway shoveled, Christmas lights up on time, never any visible chaos. Inside, the structure was different. My older brother, Troy, was the gifted one. Not because he was especially disciplined or kind or even particularly bright all the time, but because he was a boy with charm and an easy grin. And in our house, that was apparently enough to qualify as promise. My parents used the word potential around him, the way some people use the word weather, constantly, even when there was no evidence. Meredith is dependable. My mother would say, Troy just hasn't found himself yet. I heard that sentence in different forms for most of my childhood. Dependable. Reliable. Mature for your age. Such a good girl. Those phrases sound like praise when you're young. what they actually mean. In certain families, is this: you will be expected to absorb what somebody else drops. Troy forgot assignments and got second chances. I remembered everything and got more responsibility. Troy wrecked my father's truck, backing it into the mailbox at 17, and somehow the story became funny by Christmas. I forgot to sign one permission slip in 7th grade, and my mother told 3 different relatives I was getting careless. This is how exploitation begins in families like mine. Not with one outrageous event. With training. With repetition. With the quiet assignment of roles, no one admits our roles. My father was not a loud man. That made him harder to read when I was young and easier to excuse when I got older. He believed in keeping things practical, which in his language usually meant doing whatever created the least emotional inconvenience for him in the moment. My mother was the opposite. She was emotional all the time. But selectively, tears when she needed sympathy, anger when someone disrupted her narrative, hurt when accountability came too close. She was very skilled at sounding overwhelmed just before asking someone else to carry what she had dropped. When I was 12, she forgot to pay the electric bill. Not because we didn't have the money, because she misplaced the envelope under a church fundraiser packet and didn't notice until the lights flickered off during dinner. I still remember the strange sudden silence when the refrigerator stopped humming and the kitchen fell dim except for the weak orange light over the stove. Troy laughed. My father muttered something about calling in the morning. My mother sat there with one hand against her chest and said, "I cannot do everything." No one had accused her of needing to. Still, within 10 minutes, the tone in the room had shifted until I felt guilty too. I was the one who found the utility number online. The one who located the checkbook. The one who listened to my mother cry about late fees while my father stepped outside to smoke and Troy disappeared upstairs. I was 12. By 14, I knew where every important document in the house was kept. Tax folders, mortgage statements, insurance cards, the lockbox key, the little accordion file with my father's union papers and my mother's payroll stubs. Not because anyone officially assigned that to me. Because every time paperwork went missing or deadlines got close or my mother started spiraling theatrically about how much she had on her plate, I was the one who fixed the problem fastest. "Meredith's just organized," she'd say with a smile to other people, as if it were adorable. What she meant was useful. At 16, I started working weekends at a grocery store bakery and putting half my paychecks into savings because I had already realized something I couldn't yet say out loud. If I wanted a life that belonged to me, I would probably have to finance my own exit. Troy, meanwhile, drifted from hobby to hobby and expense to expense. There was always some reason he needed help. Car repairs, community college fees for classes he dropped halfway through, credit card trouble that my father called a learning experience, rent assistance. After one of his roommates moved out, my mother narrated every rescue as temporary. "He's under pressure. He's trying. You know your brother has a good heart?" Maybe he did. That was never really the issue. The issue was that good hearts do not automatically pay back money, return borrowed things, or stop consuming everyone else's margin for error. When I left for college, I took everything I owned in 2 plastic bins, 1 duffel bag, and the old silver Toyota Camry. My aunt sold me for $800 because she knew my parents would never do anything that direct or useful. I went to the University of Minnesota on scholarships, grants, and a work-study job in the admissions office. I also took out loans. My own loans. That distinction matters now in a way. It did not then. I majored in public administration because I liked systems and budgets and the hidden logic of how institutions either hold together or collapse from negligence. Maybe that sounds dry. To me, it felt like learning the machinery of chaos. It felt like a language powerful enough to explain my childhood without having to turn it into melodrama. I came home less and less as the years went on, partly because I was busy, mostly because I noticed I slept better when I was not in that house. Still, I stayed in contact. Birthdays, holidays, my mother's health scares that turned out to be less dramatic than advertised, Troy's career shifts that never settled into careers, my father's quiet requests for help with online forms and insurance portals because he couldn't make heads or tails of that stuff. Then came grad school. Then a job with a regional nonprofit managing community grant compliance. Then, eventually, a move into municipal finance consulting that paid better than anything I'd earned before and gave me the first real sense that my life might not always feel like a series of emergency responses. By 31, I had an apartment of my own. No credit card debt. A reliable used Subaru. And a credit score I checked with the kind of reverence some people reserve for church. That sounds funny until you've spent your childhood watching money used like weather and adulthood, learning that one bureaucratic problem can take years to unwind. What I had built was not glamorous, but it was solid. And because it was solid, I relaxed. That was my mistake. Somewhere in those years, I let myself believe distance had taught my parents respect. What it had really taught them was that I was not close enough to monitor. The first sign that something was wrong came 4 months before the bank called. I only recognized it later. My mother texted me on a Thursday afternoon asking for my social security number. No context. Just, "Hey honey, do you have your social security number handy? Need it for an old tax file thing." I was in the middle of reviewing a municipal expenditure summary and responded without thinking. Why? 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then reappeared. "Your father's updating something from years ago, and your old paperwork got mixed in with Troy's. He's irritated. Can you just send it so I can make sure the file is right?" That should have made me stop. But when you are raised inside a system that teaches you efficiency over suspicion, you end up smoothing over your own discomfort before anyone else has to. I didn't send the full number. I sent the last 4 digits and told her she could call me later if she needed anything else. She replied with a thumbs up. That was it. No call. No follow-up. At the time, I barely thought about it again. Looking back, I think that was when whatever they were doing moved from carelessness into intent. The second sign came 2 months later, when my father called and asked if I still had a copy of my college financial aid records. I was walking from my office to a parking garage, with the wind cutting hard down the block and my scarf half loose around my neck. "Why would you need those?" I asked. He cleared his throat. "For some paperwork comparison thing your mother's doing?" That answer meant nothing, and somehow everything. I stopped beside a concrete pillar in the garage and listened to traffic hiss outside. "What paperwork comparison thing?" "A pause. You know how your mother gets about files?" "No." I thought, I know how she gets when she wants something without having to explain herself. "I don't have those handy." I said, "Okay." He answered too quickly. "Doesn't matter." He hung up before I could ask more. That night, I thought about calling back. I didn't. Partly because I was tired. Partly because I already knew the dance. If I pressed, my mother would sigh dramatically. My father would retreat into silence. And the whole thing would somehow become about me being suspicious or ungrateful or making everything complicated. Family systems like mine teach you to ration your objections because every honest question threatens to become a 3-act production. So I let it go. Until the bank called. The woman on the phone introduced herself as Denise from North Star Community Bank and explained that because the account was now delinquent, they were required to begin direct outreach to the listed borrower. Borrower. She gave the original amount. $22,000. I stopped hearing parts of the sentence after that. 22,000? I had never borrowed $22,000 from any bank in my adult life outside federal student aid. And certainly not through a local community lender using my parents' address. I set the mug down because my hand was starting to shake. What date was this loan opened? I asked. She told me. 14 months earlier. What was it for? There was another brief professional pause. I'm not able to discuss full use of proceeds over the phone without additional verification. But the loan notes indicate home improvement and debt consolidation. Home improvement. Debt consolidation. My parents' kitchen had been remodeled the year before. New cabinets, quartz counters, a refrigerator with one of those doors that lit up when you knocked on the glass. My mother had called me during that process to complain about backsplash pricing and ask whether I thought brushed brass was timeless or already over. I remember standing in Target near the paper towel aisle listening to her talk about under-cabinet lighting while I compared prices on detergent. At no point did she mention that part of the renovation was apparently being financed under my name. I asked Denise what documentation they had on file. She told me they had a signed application. Identity verification. Tax documentation. And employment information. Employment information. Mine. My stomach dropped so fast it almost felt physical. I did not apply for this loan. I said. Her voice changed. Not with fear. With procedure. I'm sorry to hear that. Miss Sloan, in that case, you may need to file a fraud affidavit and police report. I can note the account and have our risk department contact you. The word fraud hovered in the air between us. Fraud? People hear that word and picture strangers. Fake IDs. Hoodies. Hackers. They do not picture a mother standing at a kitchen island talking about pendant lighting while using her daughter's name to secure money. I ended the call and sat down on the floor beside my refrigerator because my knees had stopped feeling reliable. The tiles were cold through my slacks. The apartment was silent except for the radiator clicking and a car alarm sounding somewhere outside in the alley. I stared at the cabinet under the sink. For so long my eyes started blurring. Then I did what I always do when something terrifying happens. I made a list. Call the bank back. Pull credit reports. Freeze credit. Document everything. Call parents. Do not call parents until after documentation. That last line saved me. By noon, I had downloaded all 3 credit reports. The loan was there. So was a hard inquiry from 14 months earlier. And one more thing. A store credit line I had never opened. Only $1,800. But active. Current. My heartbeat turned loud again. Because this was no longer one shocking event. It was a pattern. I called the bank's fraud department and spent 42 minutes answering questions. Had I ever lived at that address as an adult? Yes. As a minor, and briefly during a college summer. Had I authorized anyone else to sign on my behalf? No. Had I previously shared identifying information with relatives? Yes. In the ordinary sense, families often have access to the details they should never weaponize. Did I wish to pursue a formal fraud claim? Long pause. Then yes. The woman I spoke with was patient and practiced. Her name was Alicia. She told me what most people never understand until they are in the middle of it. Once financial fraud enters the family, the hardest step is often not proving the paperwork is false. It is deciding whether you are willing to let the truth create consequences for the people who raised you. I thanked her, hung up, then stared at my phone for nearly 10 minutes before calling my mother. She answered on the second ring. Hi. Sweetheart. Normal voice. Light. Warm. It made me angrier than panic would have. Why is there a loan in my name tied to your address? Silence. Not confusion. Silence of recognition. Then a little breath. Oh, she said. Just that. Oh, my hand tightened around the phone. What do you mean? Oh? Her voice shifted instantly into injured calm. Meredith, lower your tone. There are sentences that only work if someone has trained you your whole life to confuse control with guilt. 5 years earlier, that line might have made me back off. That morning, sitting on my kitchen floor with a printed credit report beside me and $22,000 of somebody else's choices attached to my identity, it had the opposite effect. Answer the question. Another pause. Then, your father was supposed to tell you. The room seemed to go very still around me. Tell me. Not ask. Not explain. Tell. I closed my eyes. When? We were going to. 14 months ago? She exhaled sharply. You don't understand the position we were in. There it was. The family anthem. Need first. Consent later. Emotion as justification. I stood up too fast and had to catch myself on the counter. What exactly did you do? This time my father's voice came on the line. He must have been listening nearby. We took a loan to consolidate some things and finish the kitchen, he said, with that maddeningly flat tone he used whenever he wanted reality to sound smaller than it was. Your mother thought it would be easier under your credit because the rate would be better. Your credit. Your rate. As casually as if they had borrowed a casserole dish. I laughed once. A short, shocked sound that did not feel like mine. You committed fraud? No. My mother snapped immediately. Don't use that word. What word would you prefer? Family help? I was so stunned. I almost admired the audacity. Family help. When she said it, I saw the whole architecture at once. Not just the loan. The years before it, the role they had assigned me, the assumption beneath every request. You are the stable one. So, your stability belongs partly to us. You are the responsible one. So, your responsibility can be accessed like equity. You are the one who won't make a scene. So we do not need permission. My father tried next. It was temporary. We were paying it. It is delinquent. That's because Troy had an issue, and we had to shift some money around. Of course, Troy was inside it. Of course he was. The old pattern. Just in larger numbers. I walked to the window and stared down at the alley without seeing it. How many things are in my name? Silence again. Longer this time. Then my mother said, "Just the loan?" She said it too fast. I knew instantly she was lying. I asked again. My father cut in. "Don't make this bigger than it is." That sentence changed something in me permanently. Because there I was, holding proof that my parents had used my identity to take out debt and let it go delinquent. And his concern was still the size of my reaction. Not the act. The inconvenience of accountability. I took a breath so deep it hurt. "You have until tonight to tell me everything attached to my name." I said, "Everything. Credit lines. Utilities. Authorized users. Any document you signed? Any account you opened? Any inquiry you made? If I find anything you don't disclose, I'm filing every report I need to file, and I won't warn you first." My mother started crying. That quick, wounded cry she could produce like weather on command. "Meredith, how can you talk to us like this?" I looked at my reflection in the glass. Pale face. Tight mouth. A woman I barely recognized because for the first time she was not negotiating with guilt before finishing a sentence. "How did you do this to me?" No one answered. Then I hung up. I spent the rest of the day in motion. Credit freeze. Fraude à l'air. Account log spreadsheet. Certified request to the bank for full document copies. Notes from every call, every timestamp, every name. By evening, my dining table looked like a one-woman audit unit. Printed reports, yellow notepad, laptop open, coffee gone cold again. The light outside had turned blue-gray, and the apartment windows reflected the room back at me like a duplicate life. Accepte, obsprezece poi. M. My father emailed. Subject line, documentation. Inside were scanned PDFs. The loan statement. A partial application. A utility account in my name from 2 years earlier that had apparently been opened when their old gas service was interrupted during some billing dispute. And one credit card I had not known about. Closed now. Balance transferred elsewhere. I stared at the files until nausea crawled up my throat. Not because of the amounts. Because of the signatures. My name appeared at the bottom of the loan application in a shaky digital script that resembled mine only if someone had watched me sign from across a room and then tried to imitate the motion. Not the meaning. Under employment, they had listed my salary almost exactly correctly. Under contact information, they had used my old college email address, one I still technically had access to through a recovery backup and had not checked in months. That detail turned my blood cold. Planning. This had required planning. Not one desperate mistake. Not one emotional lapse. A sequence. Someone had thought through how to keep me from seeing alerts. And because my mother is the kind of woman who never remembers where she put her sunglasses, but can somehow locate everyone else's weaknesses without a map, I knew exactly who had likely orchestrated most of it. Accepte, patruzet și patru. She called. I let it ring once. Twice. Then answered. Her voice came soft this time. Exhausted. Strategic. We were going to fix it before you ever knew. No. I said, you were going to keep using me as long as it worked. That is not fair. Fair. Families like mine only ever discover that word when they are losing control. My father got on the line again. We can catch the payments up. That's not enough. We'll handle it. You already did handle it. Silence. Then my mother. Lower now. Almost whispering. If you report this, your father could lose everything. I closed my eyes. There it was. Not remorse. Consequences as leverage. A daughter's love converted into a final pressure point. In the old version of my life, that sentence would have broken me. That night, it did something else. It clarified the stakes. Because what she was really saying was simple. Let us keep your future compromised so ours stays more comfortable. I sat down at the table and looked at the fake signature on the page. Then at the utility account. Then at the closed card. How much total? I asked. No one answered. I repeated myself. This time my father gave me a number. $41,360. I stopped breathing for a second. Because the loan had only been the front door. Behind it was the whole house. $41,360. I repeated the number back to him because sometimes hearing a thing twice is the only way to make it enter your body as fact. $41,360. My father said yes. My mother started crying again. That soft, trembly cry she used whenever reality was becoming expensive. I sat at my dining table with the loan documents spread around me, my laptop glowing pale against the dark apartment. And for a moment, I felt exactly like I had at 12 years old, when the lights went out in our kitchen and everyone turned to me to locate the problem while pretending no one had created it. Only now I was 34. And the problem was my life. List everything. I said. My voice sounded strange to me. Too calm. That frightened my mother more than anger would have. She inhaled sharply. There was the loan, she said. And the card? But that one's closed. And the gas account was temporary. And what? A pause. Then my father said, there was a store line of credit for appliances when the kitchen came in over budget. I closed my eyes. Anything else? No. I waited. The silence stretched. Then my mother, quieter now, said, there may have been one furniture financing account, but we paid that off. May have been, as if memory were the issue. Not theft. I wrote everything down. Luan. Gas account. Closed card. Appliance credit line. Furniture financing. Then I asked the question that mattered most. Did Troy know? No answer. That was answer enough. I let out one slow breath through my nose. Of course he did. He knew we were juggling things. My father said quickly, not details. He lives in your basement. I snapped. He knows the color of your mood before breakfast. Don't insult me. My mother tried a different tactic. Honey, please, your brother has had a hard few years. I looked at the pages in front of me. The fake signature. The wrong email. The account numbers. The payment history. 34 years of being the stable one condensed into paperwork. And I've had an easy time? I asked. No one answered. Then my father said, in the same tone he used when he wanted life to return to manageable size, we're telling you now, we're being honest. That sentence almost made me laugh. Because in his mind, honesty apparently meant full disclosure only after discovery. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling for a second. The radiator hissed once. A car passed outside with bass thudding faintly through the alley. Then I said the only thing left worth saying. Tomorrow morning, I'm calling an attorney. My mother gasped. Meredith. No. Yes. You don't need to do that. I absolutely do. We are your parents. That line used to mean something enormous in my life. Authority. Obligation. A kind of moral gravity. That night it sounded like what it had always partly been in our house. A billing category. I stood up and walked to the sink because I suddenly needed movement more than comfort. No. I said, you are the people who used my identity to borrow money and hid it from me until a bank called. That is what you are tonight. Then I hung up before she could cry harder. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my own name at the bottom of forms I had never signed. At 5:12 M. I got out of bed. Made coffee strong enough to taste bitter, even through the cream, and started the next list. Fraud attorney. Identity theft report. Police report. Credit bureau dispute. Bank fraud packet. Employment HR heads up in case credit monitoring flagged something through internal systems. Therapist. That last one surprised me enough that I stared at it for a minute. Then left it there. 8:30. I was sitting in a glass-walled office downtown across from a woman named Dana Feldman, who specialized in financial fraud and consumer recovery. She wore a navy suit, low heels, and the kind of expression I have always trusted in professionals. Alert, unimpressed by drama, impossible to emotionally steamroll. I laid everything out. The call, the credit reports, the PDFs, the accounts, the family dynamic. Dana listened without interrupting, except to ask for dates and amounts. When I finished, she folded her hands on the table and said, "You have two separate problems. The first is legal exposure. The second is emotional manipulation. The second will make the first harder if you let it." I stared at her, then nodded, because in one sentence she had described my whole life. She explained the options clearly. I could file full fraud reports and force a formal criminal route. I could dispute every account, submit affidavits, and let the institutions investigate independently. I could also, if I wanted, send a demand through counsel first requiring immediate written admission, repayment structure, notarized declarations, and direct remediation under threat of full reporting. Would that keep this out of criminal court? I asked. Maybe, she said, if they comply fast. Completely. And without games. But you need to understand something. Meredith, people who do this inside families often rely on delay, tears, guilt, partial truths, promises without structure. If you give them emotional space, they will use it as procedural space. I wrote that down. Emotional space becomes procedural space. She looked at my notes and gave the smallest hint of a smile. Good, she said. You listen like someone who's been cleaning up other people's messes since childhood. I met her eyes. I have. She nodded like that, confirmed something she had already guessed. Then she asked, What do you want? It was such a simple question. And because I had been raised in a family where my wants were usually treated as either negotiable or inconvenient, I almost answered with strategy instead of truth. Then I didn't. I want my name clean. I said, I want my money protected. I want every dollar back. And I want this to hurt enough that they never try it again. Dana leaned back slightly. That, she said, is a very useful level of clarity. By noon, letters were in motion. Formal preservation requests to the bank. Dispute notices. Document demain. A draft civil demand package ready to go if my parents did not respond exactly as instructed within 48 hours. Dana advised me not to speak to them again without written record. I agreed. Then, 2 hours later, my mother ignored that boundary by showing up at my apartment. Of course she did. I was standing at the counter, scanning documents when the buzzer rang twice in quick succession. Through the intercom speaker, I heard her voice, tight and breathless. Meredith, let me up. I did not move. She buzzed again. Then called. Then texted. I'm outside. Please don't do this. We need to talk face to face. Your father's falling apart. I stood there with my phone in my hand and felt that old split open inside me. One version of me wanted to run downstairs, manage the scene, lower her blood pressure, contain the feelings, keep the neighbors from hearing anything ugly. The other version had spent the morning paying a lawyer to remind her that chaos thrives on access. I chose the second one. I texted back, "You can send anything in writing." Then I muted the phone. She stayed outside for almost 20 minutes. I know because I made myself keep scanning while her messages stacked up in preview banners across the top of the screen. How can you do this to us? After everything we've done for you, your father was trying to protect the house. You know, Troy can't help right now. Please don't ruin this family. That last line almost made me sit down. Because there it was. The whole religion. Not, please help us repair what we did to you. Please don't ruin this family. As if the family had been intact right up until the moment I refused to cover its crimes. A trei, paisprezece. My father finally sent an email. Subject, we can make this right. Inside was the closest thing to remorse either of them had managed so far. He admitted they had used my identifying information. Admitted they had opened the loan and other accounts without explicit permission. Admitted they intended to manage it internally and had not told me because they feared I would overreact. Overreact. Even in confession, the insult survived. But Dana was right about one thing. Written admissions matter more than emotional tone. I forwarded the email immediately. She called me 10 minutes later. Good, she said. Now we tighten. By evening, she had sent them a formal demand packet. Not emotional. Not theatrical. Just precise. Full accounting of all obligations opened or serviced under my identity. Immediate freeze on further use of my information. Execution of notarized affidavits admitting unauthorized use. Liquidation plan for repayment in full. Deadline for first corrective actions, 72 hours. Failure to comply would trigger expanded fraud reporting. Civil action. And recommendation of criminal referral where applicable. I read the draft twice. Then a third time. It was one of the first documents in my life that made me feel protected rather than process. My parents did not take it well. My mother left 6 voicemails overnight, each more dramatic than the last. In one, she was crying so hard I could barely understand her. In another, she was furious and called Dana, "that horrible woman." In a third, she said my father's blood pressure was through the roof, and if something happened to him, I would have to live with that. That voicemail got deleted without being saved. Not because it didn't matter. Because it mattered in exactly the old way, and I was trying. For once. Not to keep poisonous things. Troy called the next afternoon. He almost never called me directly unless he wanted something. "Wow," he said without, "Hello. You really brought a lawyer into this?" "Yes." A laugh. Incredulous. "Mean. You're acting like Mom and Dad robbed a bank." "They robbed me." There was silence. Then, "It wasn't like that." I moved to the window and looked down into the alley again. The same way I had the morning of the first call. "Did you know?" He paused too long. Then, "I knew they were moving stuff around." "Did you know they used my name?" "They said it was temporary." "Did you know the total was over $41,000? He exhaled sharply. "I didn't know the number." That was not the same as innocence. I let that sit between us. Then I asked, "How much of that went to you?" "Meredith?" "How much?" Another pause. Then, muttered it. "Some of the consolidation was mine." "Of course." I closed my eyes. There are moments when family history becomes so clear it almost feels mathematical. Every rescue, every excuse, every softened consequence, every time someone else got to fail and I got told to understand. It all leads somewhere. In my family, it led to my credit file. "Troy," I said, very quietly. "You are done calling me dramatic for cleaning up a disaster you helped create." He started in with the usual lines. "I'm your brother. This isn't black and white. You always think paperwork matters more than people." That last one almost fascinated me. Because people like Troy always say that when paperwork is the first thing that can finally hold them still. I cut him off. "No," I said. "I think paperwork matters when people lie." Then I hung up too. 3 days later, my parents came to Dana's office. I was there. Not because I wanted to see them. Because I wanted to watch the truth sit in a room where it couldn't cry its way into being smaller. The conference room was cold and overlit. With a glass pitcher of water sweating onto a tray of coasters, nobody used. My mother wore a soft blue sweater and too much mascara, as if she had dressed for sympathy. My father looked gray around the mouth and older than I had ever seen him. Troy was not invited. Dana opened the meeting by sliding copies of the document packet across the table. My mother touched the pages as if they might burn. "We don't need all this," she said. "We can work it out as a family." Dana didn't even look at her. "You lost the privilege of handling this as a family when you used your daughter's identity without consent?" It was maybe the most satisfying sentence I had heard in years. My father rubbed a hand over his face. My mother turned to me. "Is this really what you want?" And because she had asked me that same basic question in different forms my whole life, whenever my honesty became expensive, I answered without hesitation. "Yes." She started crying again. Dana kept going. Unauthorized personal loan. Unauthorized consumer accounts. Misrepresentation of identity. Potential tax document misuse. False signatures. Unauthorized contact routing. Repayment exposure. Credit remediation costs. My parents sat there listening as their behavior was translated out of family language and into legal language. That was the moment I think my father finally understood the scale of what they had done. Not when I cried. Not when the bank called. Not when I asked them directly. When another adult with a calm voice and a billing rate explained that this could become a matter of record. He looked at me across the table. Not accusing. Just stunned. I didn't think. No. I said, "You didn't." Dana laid out the repayment plan. They would refinance their house properly in their own names and liquidate a portion of my father's pension bridge account. They would sell the boat my father barely used and had insisted for years was the only thing I've got that's mine. They would close every unauthorized account. They would sign notarized admissions of unauthorized use and accept responsibility for all balances. Phase. Remediation costs. And attorney expenses. They would reimburse me for credit monitoring, legal fees, and any interest differential tied to temporary damage. Every penny. My mother looked horrified. Not at what they'd done, at what it would cost. "We can't do all of that," she whispered. Dana's face did not change. Then Sloan proceeds with the next set of filings. My father stared at the table, then at me, then back at the table. Finally, he asked, "If we do this, is that the end of it?" That question told me everything. He still wanted a transaction. Pie. And the moral ledger resets. I leaned forward slightly. "If you do this," I said, "it is the end of your access to me until I decide otherwise. It is not the end of what you did." My mother made a wounded sound. I ignored it. Because for once, I was not there to manage her pain into something safer for everyone else. They signed the first set of documents that day. Not everything, but enough to lock the process. When my mother reached the affidavit page describing unauthorized use of identifying information, her hand trembled visibly. Good. Not because fear was satisfying, because truth should feel heavier than convenience. The next 6 months were ugly. Not dramatic every day. Worse. Administrative. The kind of suffering people underestimate because it comes in envelopes and portal alerts and notarized forms rather than screaming matches. My credit score dropped before it recovered. I spent lunch breaks on hold with institutions proving I existed separately from what had been done in my name. Dana's office coordinated disputes. The bank froze collections while the fraud review and civil repayment structure moved in parallel. My parents refinanced at a terrible rate because their own credit could not get close to what they had gotten under mine. Again. Good. Consequences are supposed to resemble the harm they correct. They sold the boat in July. My father emailed me the sale confirmation with no message attached. Just the PDF. I looked at it for a long time. He had loved that boat. Mentioned it in almost every summer conversation for 10 years. Talked about the lake, the way some men talk about freedom. Now it was gone because he had mistaken my future for his backup plan. The pension bridge account went next. Then the kitchen appliances financing. Then the store line. Then the balance transfer. On a B1. The numbers dropped. Dana insisted every payment be documented. Every closure letter archived. Every released liability confirmed in writing. I loved her more every week. By September, the total unauthorized balance, our phase, and associated costs had been fully remediated. Fully. Every dollar. Every fee. Every legal expense. Every monitoring charge. And because I had learned by then that healing without structural change is just future damage wearing a softer face, I did one more thing. I changed everything they had ever been able to use. New email recovery chain. New banking passwords. New security questions with false answers only I knew. New freeze settings. New P.O. box for sensitive mail. Even a change in which payroll account my bonuses landed in. People call that extreme until their own mother uses an old college email to open debt in their name. When the final confirmation letter came, I opened it at my kitchen table in the same apartment where the first bank call had cracked my life open. It was early evening. Rain tapped lightly against the window. The basil plant on the sill had finally recovered after I repotted it. The room smelled faintly of tomato soup because I had something simmering on the stove, and for once I was not too sick with anxiety to taste food. The letter was short. Account obligations satisfied. Fraud remediation completed. Borrower liability released pending final reporting corrections. I read it once, then again, then set it down and cried so quietly I barely heard myself. Not because I missed them, not because I felt guilty, because my name was mine again. My mother called 2 days later. I almost didn't answer. Then I did. Her voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. Not theatrical. Not wounded. Just smaller. It's all paid, she said. Yes? A pause. Then, we did what you wanted. There was something in that sentence that still reached for manipulation. Not fully, but enough. As if the real story was my demand, not their act. I looked around my apartment. The lamp by the sofa, the stack of library books on the side table, the bowl of peaches on the counter. A whole life built slowly and honestly. No, I said, you repaired what you broke. She went quiet. Then, after a moment, can we move on now? Move on. Another family phrase, meaning, can we skip the moral part and return to access? I took a breath. You need to understand something. I said, paying it back was the minimum. It was not redemption. She started crying again. Softer this time. Maybe real. Maybe not. I no longer found it useful to sort. What do you want from me? She asked. The answer came easily because I had spent months earning it. Distance. I said, honesty. No more using family as a shield for behavior you know is wrong. No more emergency requests. No more paperwork with my name anywhere near your lives. And no more treating my boundaries like cruelty just because they inconvenience you. She sniffed. You make me sound monstrous. No, I said. Your choices do that. That was the boundary. Not poetic. Not cinematic. Just true. My father never made one big apology. That would have required a kind of emotional courage he didn't really have. Instead, he sent practical things. Sale confirmation. Refinance updates. Closure letters. Then, one day in October, a short handwritten note tucked into a legal packet Dana forwarded to me after one final signature release. You were right to do what you did. I told myself we were buying time. Really, we were stealing yours. I'm sorry. I read it twice. then put it in a drawer. Not because it meant nothing, because it did not get to mean everything. That's another lesson families like mine teach you late. An apology is not a key to immediate re-entry. Sometimes it is just accurate paperwork for the soul. Troy texted me once around Thanksgiving. "So are you talking to mom and dad again, or what?" That was the exact wording. No reflection. No accountability. Just impatience. I stared at the message and suddenly felt something almost peaceful. Because I could finally see him clearly too. Not as the center of every old resentment. Just a man who had spent his life being cushioned by other people's competence and now found boundaries rude because they interrupted the service. I replied with 4 words. "Not your concern anymore." Then blocked him. The holidays were strange that year. Quiet. Lighter. Aunt Jean invited me to dinner. And for the first time in my life, I spent Christmas in a house where no one expected me to smooth anything over. We ate roast chicken and sweet potatoes. Her dog slept under the table. Snow kept brushing softly against the windows all evening. At one point, she handed me a second glass of wine and said, "You seem different?" I smiled. "I am." "How?" I thought about it. Then said, "I used to think being needed meant being loved." She nodded slowly. "And now?" "Now I think being used looks a lot like that until you stop." She raised her glass a little. "To stopping." I laughed and clinked mine against hers. That was one of the first, genuinely warm holiday memories of my adult life. By spring, my credit had largely recovered. My accounts were clean. The final reporting disputes had been corrected. Dana closed my file with a neat digital folder and one last piece of advice. "Keep your freezes in place," she said, "and keep your boundaries stronger than your guilt." I told her I would. And I have. I still speak to my parents sometimes. Carefully. Briefly. On terms they did not choose. No shared accounts. No last-minute rescues. No paperwork favors. No, can you just, requests without written explanation and immediate, no if it smells wrong. My mother tested those boundaries twice in the first year. Once with a tax question that turned out to be a veiled request for money. Once with a request to co-sign something, just temporarily. I said no, both times before she finished the sentence. That changed her faster than any argument ever had. My father mostly became quieter. Maybe shame did some of that. Maybe age. Maybe the simple fact that, for the first time in his life, practicality had finally cost him something personal enough to feel educational. What changed most, though, was me. I stopped answering every call immediately. Stopped translating guilt into duty. Stopped assuming competence required surrender. Stopped calling myself lucky when all I really meant was exhausted, but functioning. There is a version of revenge people like to picture in stories like this. Explosive confrontation. Publique humiliation. Parents begging on the front steps. But the deepest satisfaction did not come from any of that. It came from watching the balances go down. From signed affidavits. From boat sale confirmations. From legal language that could not be cried over into meaning something else. From the exact, beautiful discipline of making people return what they took. Every penny. Because here's what I finally understood. My parents did not just take out a loan in my name. They borrowed against a story they had been telling themselves about me since I was little. That I would carry it. that I would understand, that I would clean it up. That being the good daughter meant being a quiet extension of their survival. The bank call ended that story. Not because it made me cruel, because it made me exact. If you are listening to this and some part of it feels familiar, hear me carefully. Financial betrayal inside a family is still betrayal. Paperwork can be violence when it is built on stolen consent. And love that only survives when you stay unprotected is not love worth preserving at your own expense. My parents used my name to borrow more than $41,000 behind my back. When the bank called, I made sure they paid every penny back. Not because I hated them. Because for the first time in my life, I loved my own future enough not to let them spend it. If this story stayed with you, subscribe for more. And if you've ever had to choose between family peace and self-protection, leave the word receipt in the comments. Sometimes justice is not loud. Sometimes it is just documented.